I just clarified my thought, and it is, how does erasure play into one's understanding of family?
Okay. 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 Let me officially introduce the episode. Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds great.
Episode 17. Me and Josh today are joined by Celia Idoland, a erstwhile shoegaze artist, as well as a thinker and writer, and kind of poet type vibe person, and educator based in New York City. Today we will be talking about the idea of mutant family, mutant lineage. What does it mean to be a mutant in the context of a genealogy? You have a tradition, whether it's genetic, cultural, or both, that's been passed on to you. And what does it mean to represent a mutation of that lineage? In some ways, it's an endpoint, and in some ways, it could be a beginning. But in many cases, it is a sort of endpoint, or sort of like fizzling out of this pattern that's been going for a long time. In these contexts, we'll be bringing in several different texts, but I want to focus mostly on sort of like more of a personal approach to this. But the texts that we have read or watched or listened to were The Emissary by Yoko Tawada. It came out in 2014 or something. And then The Cranes Are Flying, which is a Soviet movie from the 60s, and a podcast episode about Jewish Soviet diaspora and leftism. Am I wrong about that? I didn't listen to that, to be completely honest. But yeah, Celia, how's it going?
Yeah,
and do you have any corrections so far?
It's about, maybe we could say, like, secularism versus sort of like religious or spiritual revivals, maybe that last one for the podcast. But otherwise, no, I'm happy to be here. Maybe my first and only podcast ever. You never know. So just happy to share it with you guys.
Welcome. I have a quick question specifically on the podcast note, and I don't know if this will be helpful, but I was curious about the cultural reference to secularism as it relates to Jewish identity specifically, because it seemed as though part of the argument in the podcast was around a concept around secularism that felt way different from my like Christian upbringing and understanding of secularism, right? Like, and go ahead.
Quickly, can we get like an actual citation of the podcast? Just because I don't remember what it is.
The podcast is On the Nose, and I don't remember what the title of the episode was.
It's a religion, secularism, and the Jewish left. I can't believe they named the podcast On the Nose, and there is just like a Jewish-looking nose on the cover.
Yeah. And who's the host of that podcast?
I think it varies, but on that episode, they had the editor-in-chief, Ariel Angel, who has been part of this like revival and reimagining of Jewish currents, which has become, like, I feel like a very central cultural node in Jewish left, at least in New York right now. And a contributing writer, Mitch Abador, who's from like the older generation of Jewish currents in like the 40s and 50s when it emerged. I don't even know if it was named, it might have not been named Jewish currents then. It was Jewish life in 1946. Yeah.
So yeah, and also just to like do another like quick like a sub introduction, like one of the major themes of this podcast episode, like of this Mutant Manifesto episode, is going to be, I think, maybe specifically about this tension between secularism and sort of religious inheritance, especially in the context of like fascism and the and like colonialism. But yeah, just to interject that other kind of like post intro.
Yeah, I'm can you say a bit more about the notion of secularism that you grew up with, just to help like contrast it with what this episode talked about? It has been like a few months since I listened last, but I think it's still rather fresh in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two paths that I thought of it in. I think the sort of idea of the secular versus the religious, right? Like, we don't want any religion in our schools, right? Like, we want to keep that separate. But then when it came to like Christian secularism, in my understanding, it was people who would maybe go to church on Christmas and Easter for the high holidays, as it were, but not necessarily practice, like, say prayers or consider themselves Christians other than like whatever traditions that they would go through just to be like, okay, this is my family, like they want me to go here, so I'll show up, right? It's Christmas would also be a holiday akin to Thanksgiving in that understanding of like secularism. So it's like a complete removal from every religious aspect, but in some ways adopting a culture that references it. So yeah, that's kind of how I saw it. Like, I was trying to thread the needle in that way, but there are also, the basic one, which is just like, oh, if I'm secular, I have no connection. Not atheist, like they could be agnostic, but they just have no connection to any maybe religious tradition.
Okay, so is it used in any way, like in a derogatory way, as far as you remember growing up? Like, just different?
No,
Like, how,
yeah,
okay.
just yeah,
Yeah, I think in this case, like the secularism that was being brought up is almost it's just like its own form of very um like there's like a pride in it, like proudly secular in a sense. It's almost close to like atheism, but I think it remains like a strain within Jewish communities. Like they were building like communities that were coming from it, and maybe atheists also have like atheist summer camps. I don't know, but I know like particularly at least in Jewish history in the 20th century in New York, there was like an emerging like secular movement that was retaining the identity of being Jewish. But I think what was coming up in the podcast is that they retain that identity in this very like, well, I am Jewish. Like, there's nothing to have to like justify or practice in terms of religious ritual. I just am Jewish, so you're able to get rid of all the other dogma or authority and then make and gather and be Jewish, but practice in a completely secular way, which I guess was like synonymous with freedom from dogma. Um, I think atheism even would have made it too much around the attitude towards God, and it wasn't just rejecting God; it was like rejecting rabbinical authority, which was writ large the authority over Jewish communities for the preceding um like hundreds and hundreds of years. It was deeper than the relationship with God. It was like, yeah, removing from a lot of different types of communal dogma. And the difference, as it was brought up on the podcast episode, this Ariel, what's her name? Ariel Angel. Yeah, she's a wild card, but she kind of came back and was like, there isn't really this excited home for the Jewish left now. She wrote a book about like psychedelica and neo Hasidic communities or something, and it was just like, we need to sort of revive this sort of like more passionate, intense experience for this to feel like its own, um, like a community people want to participate in. And this Mitch, the older generation, was just like, you don't why do you have to do that? We fought so hard to get rid of the stranglehold of like Jewish tradition over being a practicing Jewish person, but she was just like that identity of just saying I'm Jewish doesn't really mean something in a world in which all of our identities are just assimilated and homogenized. Because he's still coming from the, like, my parents are similar, where they're still coming from their memories of the Soviet Union, where they had, Jew stamped on their passport, and is like singled out in a way that then you don't have to explain anything. But I don't know, in our generation, it's so remarkably different that I think they're like grasping for actually what sets them apart. So that was kind of the conflict, like secularism, and then um where that failed. Jackson, you have something to say?
Totally. Okay, so I was thinking, I think that it might be worth like tracing out more. So like, what does secularism mean specifically in a Jewish context? Because I feel like it is interesting that like, um, if you're a like Jewish person, then like even if you're atheist, you're still kind of Jewish. You're still Jewish, right? Whereas like if you are from a WASP background, you can kind of effectively become atheist and be seen as atheist. Whereas if you're Jewish, even if you are atheist, you're still Jewish. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of this like the Jewish identity kind of in America, like kind of straddles the line between like a sort of cultural, racial, and religious identity. And so, like in that context, I feel like secularism plays a specific role as a historical context. Is that true?
Say more. Say a little more.
What, Josh? Did you have something? I don't know.
No. I was saying maybe I can help, but you finish what you were saying. That's why I was like, maybe I.
It sounds like what you were saying about that podcast episode is that it traces this sort of like recent history of a sort of rejection through within the Jewish community of like New York of a sort of religious dogma, but that still retained the need for community, but said like, okay, we're going to do this through a non-religious, non-dogmatic way. And that was sort of what became to be known as secularism, like secular Judaism. Is that true? I don't know. Like,
What were
is
you gonna? Did you want to? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and please stop me whenever.
yeah, say it.
Yeah, I'm the rabbi
and
here.
yeah, no, wait. I think that's a really funny joke, because I was like, I think what's happening here is that the idea that I came into with secular versus religious is that secular means just like without religion in my brain, right? But it seemed when I was listening to On the Nose and this episode in particular, it seemed that secular was not the same religious dogma that encapsulated what was supposedly the Jewish identity, but maintaining the same practices without like just altering those practices to maybe encompass more people, or to sort of get the rabbinical like authority out of it, but allow us to practice the same way, right? We're going to still like the concept of a freedom Seder that they mentioned here. It's like you're
Yeah,
still
yeah,
doing
yeah.
Seder, which is still like within, I think it's the Talmudic practice, right? It's the law, like Jewish law, to do Seder, but then they're doing it in a more political lilt. So it's secular in character, but not secular in practice in my head, because it's still a tradition
Uh-huh.
and a ritual, right? It's still ritualistic within the Jewish faith, but that it seems like there is a removal, or there's an attempt to remove the religious like aspect and or restrictions from the ritual itself, right? Like the ritual is what we want, and that's part of our identity, but we don't want the God part. And that was where it's hard to reconcile for, as someone who's like non-Jewish looking in. It's like, why do the ritual in the first place? Like, because there's this muddying, I think, from outside looking in, of like both the Jewish ethnicity as identity and the Jewish faith as identity, and then, the secret nefarious third thing, which is the national Zionist Jewish identity that gets kind of roped in later. But that's not related to what the secular thing is. I just wanted to add that as like a foreshadowing point. But it's like these two, the religious versus the ethnic identities, it seems to be operating in such a unique way that is
Mm.
specific to the Jewish community.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is ultimately what becomes of that line of thought. Like once you do
Mm,
not have a connection to like historical precedents or sort of limit the amount of spirituality that can be involved or remove yourself from texts that are outside of just our everyday existence, which is I think is what the new generation was feeling now, like, and that was being brought up in the podcast, like you stripped away the connection to the religious texts and thousands of years of preceding history, and what you got Zionism, or like you got like very Zionist communities that then like in that vacuum like nationalism was filled, and it's like a poison gas where it spreads, and trying instead to fill that space with something for people who seek um Jewish community. And this is also something to point out, is that this idea of like people needing to like discover the communities they felt formerly part of and don't have a connection to, which is the mindset of the people who are like the new generation of Jewish currents who they're appealing to because they're trying to get younger Jews away from Zionism and have something else to fill that vacuum, is not actually something that I can understand from firsthand experience because I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community. So I am still a little bit old school where it's like I'm a Jew because I literally knew like 10 non-Jews until before I was 19. Like, but this
mm.
is not
Yeah.
like actually a very common experience. But I'm trying to like, for the writ large American public, who most are by this point second, third, fourth generation Jews in America, it's about having something other than Zionism. And I guess they were feeling like you can't just give people um a Seder that's just a dinner where you just sort of talk about freedom but never reference God, and you never reference the Talmud, and you never reference the religion itself. Like the downstream version is you're not really, you're like, why do it at all? But of course, for the generation of those 40s and 50s who are living like with the background of the Holocaust, and there are like, we're Jewish, let's free ourselves though of like everything and just feel free. I mean, they're in a very different perspective. And I think too, maybe this can also like come to family as well, but like the amount of energy that cultural movements have is so short-lived. And like I feel like every culture movement eventually becomes like well, this is kind of dead. You have to like revive something new that's meaningful in your generation.
Yeah.
I just wanted to cite the idea that like so many people in America right now are effectively Zionists who are not Jewish, right? And that is because of a hollowing out of the meaning of a lot of different things that liberalism is supposed to represent. Like we all gather around to celebrate joy, diversity, freedom, but all of those concepts are completely hollow when we see what they actually represent as far as the actions of the entities that are puppeting them. So I guess I say that, I don't know why I say that, but I think that's relevant to the idea of this like it's kind of the evil, the fascist evocation of a secular sort of demon. Whereas like some people might say that, oh, it's like the Zionist entity is a religious demon. Like if we want to get all woo woo, it's actually ironically the secularism that is currently kind of playing the role of this sort of like of this sort of like genocidal horrible entity.
What do you mean by that?
I
The
mean
secularism
that
part?
I mean that like there's kind of like it's the like it's kind of a it's a lack of a like you mentioned the idea that being from a certain tradition might actually situate you in perhaps a sense of ethics, a sense of morals. That like if you're in this sort of like neoliberal sort of postmodern world where you can borrow from different faiths and different jargons, just to sort of like cover up your actions, you don't have to attend to any kind of specific form of situated morality. So everything can be deconstructed and everything can be um, uh, cherry picked. So like I just think that what my main point is that like the like the genocidal actions of Israel we see currently are funded by a neoliberal state like that is openly non it's not specifically located in any like religious heritage.
Yeah, there's an article that maybe I could send if you want to add in the description, but it's was written I think even in like early on after 48, that's just like there is no God, but God gave us the land. Like kind of like an early anti-Zionist Israeli philosopher or something, but just the only thing that's left is when to evoke it for um some like transcendent meaning, which is really that is fascism, like a sort
Mm.
of hyperbolizing
Right.
what like the natural and land connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really crazy when my mom says that. I just look at her and I'm like, damn, they should have like standardized tests for like parents before
Right,
they
but I mean,
Yeah.
kids.
I just wanna put a little bit of like recognition of like this is not specifically a Jewish problem like at this moment. You know what I mean? That's what I'm really trying to say. It's like an American
Oh
problem,
yeah.
which is maybe you can see through like tracing like Jewish heritage, but like in the current moment, like it plays out. It's like fully representative of America. I feel like.
One thing that I wanted to offer as like maybe a through line is that each of these situations, including like the battle for secularism, is like the specter of oppression, right? Everybody is referencing a previous form of repression, but you said something, Celia, that was really important is that like these movements die with time. Like that same weight does not transfer over time. And in the podcast, they were mentioning, like, okay, you did all this work to create this secular culture. And when we bring in religion again, it doesn't have that same. This is Jackie, just for reference. So in Jewish currents, they had I, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, but the parsha.
Partial,
It's
yeah.
like parsha. It's like the weekly religious text, right? And then one side was like, why the fuck would you do this? We'd fought so hard to not have religion be bastardized or bastardizing our efforts. And they're like, well, you did all that work so that we can therefore engage in it in a different way. And Celia, please correct me if I was misinterpreting that. And I think like if we're even in that secular fight, there's a specter of oppression. But in our if we go back to the Zionism like aspect of it, the U.S. enterprise is banking on this the specter of World War II and the Holocaust, and is saying that how dare you ignore this, like, the never forget epithet, right? Like, how dare you ignore this history? And that is why Israel has the right to defend itself, right? These lines that we hear over and over again as like non explanations, and they're hoping that we're all haunted by this same specter of oppression that in our current time doesn't quite exist. And in fact, we see how it's like being used to oppress, right? Where that fascism link that you were mentioning, Celia, which is like, oh yeah, they're using it as a generator for fascism at this point. And that they being like the United States government and all supporters of the Zionist enterprise in what is now broadly the expansive Israel project, I guess. But I only bring that up as like maybe that's the point that we are digging into. I can there's the specter of repression in all these different in all of our circles, right, exists and maybe defines our past, but potentially does not define our future if we're talking about like mutant connections to family, right? It is us, but it's also a part that we have digested and maybe evolved from, a vestigial um, aspect of our existence.
Yeah, and I think something that like you brought up from the podcast that was such a key moment is that feeling of we fought for this. So how could you sort of like bastardize what we were fighting to free you? There was a very funny moment in the podcast, and it was truly only like a seven. It was like very 60s and 70-year-old Jew humor of New York City. But he was like, "We fought so hard, and you're bringing up Rabbi Ishkababel, and we fought so you didn't have to bring up Rabbi Ishkababel, and you're bringing it up." And then the younger, more like annoying, 20s millennial Jew is like, "It's not wasn't enough what you guys did," and like very true. But I think that desire to fulfill like the aims of your generation um is very actually I'm about to take that back because I do think that I have this skewed I buy into the narrative that it's like a generational divide, and it's not. And we're like consistently, I feel like I'm reading like there are obviously, I mean, IDF is like conscripts at 18 years old and brainwashed from when they're born. But also within the US, like there is like a right that is young as well. So it's not just the generational divide, but I think when I think about the case of family, like the inability to let go what was the battles of their generation, um, is yeah, I don't know. It's something sad. I think when I was coming into this podcast, I was thinking a lot about like, is there an ideal of what family is, given that the root of the family unit isn't born from really ideals. It's like pre the time of ideals. But I do
Mm.
think there's like definitely a deep, because I think a lot about like also, what would it mean to live in a way in which we think about seven generations, ahead of us, and like to have like a longer term project than just our lives or like the nuclear family unit. But I do wonder if also there's just always has to be a lot of letting go, and there isn't really like an ideal cultural passing down of the family goal. But I think that is a lot of people's hope, is that like they have something that's then like accomplished in their lifetime, but things are so like the world changes so vastly, and then that becomes such a destructive force in it, is like a generation's inability to let go of whatever they aim to succeed in a rapidly changing world.
Though on one hand, I'm tempted to bring in The Emissary here by Yoko Tawada, but on the other hand, I think that it would be really illuminating if y'all are interested in going down a little bit of a personal background here to get some more context for listeners and to maybe unfold this. I happen to know that both of you have interesting relationships with both family and religion when it comes to inheritance, cultural inheritance. And I wonder if there's anything there that you would like to bring up in this context.
I think my connection to religion comes from my father. It's patrilineal, but it's also, that's where my parents met, etc. And my father happens to be a religious official in the Episcopalian Church, right? Um, Part of his, to bring more personal context, part of his personal narrative is that he has always wanted, like since day one, always wanted to be a priest, right? And um, strove for that, achieved it, and like achieved it to its like zenith in many regards. And with that comes, context, like as I am born, there's this concept that I'm either going to be a demon or an angel, right, through that experience. I either fully buy into the religion, I go and maybe become a priest myself, but I have all of the beliefs, I share them, and therefore like carry that faith on, or I just completely reject it. I destroy everything that I touch, including myself, and fully reject the faith and all of its practices. I think there's also uniquely a an immigrant aspect to this, where my dad comes from Liberia and is sort of escaping that civil war. And in that escape, I think religion is heightened, right? Like, I think in conflict and in strife, religion becomes a saving grace in many ways. And so attributing his success in this new nation to religion is a very easy thing to do. Now, if I were to fully reject all of these things, it would be almost like a spit in the face of all of this effort that was put into getting me to this position, right? Like, I think one thing that's really damning, maybe, about my experience is that I went to like a religious private school in high school, right? And while it has its flaws, and I sort of like suffered different types of pain from going through that, I can't deny that being in that space primes me for a different like advantage in like a privileged life, so to speak. Like, I think that like there's no way I would have been gotten to Oxy had I not been in that environment. Or better yet, actually there is no way, because I wouldn't have known what Oxy was. Like, someone came to the school and was like, hey, like, Oxy's a great place. And I was like, you're the nicest college administrating person that I've ever met, right? And like that encouraged me to apply. Otherwise, like, I don't know where I would be. So I can attribute a lot of where I am now to that religious background. And maybe to close this out, because I think I've been going for a minute, I think that knowing what I know now and like leaving that behind, but also knowing that what that effect looks like and means for my family is frustrating. And I'll leave it there.
Wow, there's just so many questions that I have. I can give like a little bit of a background too, and then maybe we can just like get into it. But yeah, in I guess when like the thoughts of like family and religion emerge in my mind, yeah, an interesting thing in my situation is that I grew up in the most religious context out of my parents, so out of my family, um, for a few generations, as I mean, early 1900s Russia, like, as far as I understand, most of my family engaged in the revolution to some degree and were, like, very excited about also leaving the religious bubble, the shtetl, and, like, participating in this revolution. And then by the time it gets to my parents' generation, it's so repressed to practice Judaism, and it is just like a passport national identity. So that also kind of drove their like nationalist frame of what Judaism is. But when they come to the States, um, they just doing their thing. My sister's a little bit wild in high school, and they're like, Celia's gonna go to religious school, stay on the path, and they just throw me into like Orthodox Jewish school, having actually zero idea of what that tradition is that has already been fermenting in America for decades by that point. Like, modern Orthodoxy is like just a very particular strain, and I was like threw into it. Like, I went suddenly I'm thrown in middle school, and we're like studying this medieval text like half the day. And I'm just like, what's going on? So it's I don't know. Sometimes it's funny because I'm like, maybe this isn't connected, but I'm like late to everything. But one of my theories is just like once I just showed up in life and like without any explanation, it was just like of suddenly like religious time, it completely contextless, and I was just doing that from 10 to 18. But yeah, I discovered that you could sort of not keep all the rules and things wouldn't strike you with lightning in high school, and then um I don't know, it was like an intense period of discovery and rejection of the religion after, but I think the reason that I was um drawn to explore it again came from an emptiness that I was feeling, maybe just waffling in what I thought of secular reality. Like there just didn't feel like there was anything more or deeper. And I was really getting into Jewish philosophers like Martin Buber and Emmanuel Levinas, who were interpreting the text to have meaning that was relevant to just living a more intense existence. Like I got really, really into Martin Buber's I and Thou, and I got really into also, yeah, just like the ways in which you could interpret the relationship with a monotheistic God to actually justify every time you just felt sort of like crazy and intense about the world. I mean, in contrast to, you know, the sort of like what has become um, like capitalist liberal culture of like everything is all about like tolerance, neutrality, and sort of handpicking emotions, and the only thing that's stigmatized now, or the only thing that's expected, is that you just express your like autonomous wishes and hope that it like matches with someone else's and then just interact on that basis. And I was just like, I don't feel like that, I don't think like that. um I and thou, like it's so different. It's so different. It's so much. It feels so much more like feeling. So I kind of got back to it then, and then I sort of chilled out, and I was like, it's not. I can't really take a step back and be like Judaism is my only identity, or there's just so much else happening in the world. But I will say the very last thing I'll just sort of leave off is saying that right now, the most important factor that as it plays into my daily life is that I'm a public school teacher, which I went into with a lot of like high hopes about that being the counter towards the insular community that I grew up with. And I think I still have this like sense of like we don't have to be going in to necessarily pray rote from the same book, divided by genders, but I can't believe that we just start the day without any contemplation, without any like ritual celebration. And I know for a fact that it is possible to do that in a way that doesn't disrupt learning, and I'm like very interested in a school community that could do that with different faiths. So that really drives my life and interests. And obviously like anti-Zionism, even though there's a lot of conversation in Jewish communities about like is there any purpose to organizing as Jews for this because of the fact that it transcends the Jewish identity? But like whatever, I don't know. It's like a Pascal's wager thing. Like, what if it counts to be an anti-Zionist Jew? What if you shouldn't give up your religion and culture to the worst of it? Like, just in case, I guess I'll be part of it. I don't feel that particularly defensive. I don't actually really
Mm-hmm.
really care, but I might try from that angle.
I mean, I feel like off the dome, I feel like there is an argument to be made that like within the Jewish lineage of like thinking and of faith, you can find arguments like plenty of fodder for anti-Zionism. So like it's like you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater because like you have because like you can have the community and also have the stance, and they're both like they feed one another. The anti-Zionism and the community are in alignment in that situation. I mean, that's not the case for everyone though. Like a lot of Jewish communities are Zionist, so um, it's not like
Well,
it's
what's very,
universal.
very strange is when I have brought up that line, often the reaction is that might have been the case in the 1890s, but like it's not the
Mm.
case now. But you're evoking literally God, which has never been a proven case existing.
Hmm.
But yeah, people have like this really, I think what really upsets me, and I think war does this to people's mind, is like you have to make it to the finish line. It's like once it began, there is no steps back. Even though
Mm.
ultimately every war ends in negotiation, but the mentality people get into with that very binary like winner and loser is it doesn't even matter. Like you bring up historical antecedents and it's like, but this is where we are now, and you have to.
Mm.
It's
Hmm.
really horrible when you hear how limited people's thinking, how narrow it gets.
Um, maybe okay. So like on the topic of y'all's upbringings with religion, right? And this idea of like when you started to understand that like if you took a detour from the designated path, you wouldn't in fact be struck with lightning. I'm curious about unpacking when that was and how that happened for you. And I also wanted to kind of bring in this idea because like I've also recently become a part of the like Minnesota public school system, and although I'm working with people who are nominally divergent in various ways as far as the students, like I've recently listened to a different podcast called Schizotopia that had a episode where the podcast host was unpacking this idea that he believes that high school is the only state sponsored religion in America, which I think is actually pretty interesting. High school being the only religion that America has, which I think actually makes sense. But like high
Because it has
school,
a ton of rituals. Because it has
because
prom.
yes, it has prom, it has a ton of rituals, and also if you think about it, it has that kind of adaptability to fit. Like there are high schools of many different ilks, and yet they all have
Yeah.
one aim, which is to ascend through adolescence into the workforce. So like into the so like whether you take the like all girls like Christian school route, or you take the like the prep school route that I took, where it's all about like completely fitting into that and niching into that, or you take like a public school, um, like lowest common denominator, like whatever you can take, whatever you can get route. It all leads to the same ideal, which is slotting as well as possible into the as frictionlessly as possible into the workforce. But but my question is like, but you also along the way come up with all these different sort of like conflicts that you see in various different religious initiation ceremonies and stories, um, that may have to do with cultural difference, or it may have to do with a reckoning with oneself. And I feel like in the case of somebody who goes to a religious high school, which it seems like both of you had a religious schooling experience, I'm curious about these moments where you started to realize that, like, wait, if if I jerk off, I won't be struck down immediately or whatever. If you would be, again, like,
Oh wait, okay.
it's an optional
Sorry, I was.
it's an optional tangent, but like if you would be interested in like unpacking some of these moments where like you start to understand that like the religious dogma that you are maybe given is not actually the case, and like how did you learn that?
I think it was very easy for me because I was born closer to the religion than a lot of people who were touting it. So it's like my dad is a priest, but then these people who don't know the faith are also forcing it on other people, and I was like, what the fuck? Like you don't even like go to church as often as I do. And you're supposedly in a better position. So that's when I started realizing the inconsistencies. It's like quite literally just white people acting with impunity in the name of God, and me seeing and being like, so you don't even actually know what the full ritual is. Like you don't do the ritual the way that I know the ritual is supposed to be done. And I just lucked out. My dad's a little bit of a stickler and knows all the like things and tells me why these things are happening, and so I could pick up on that really early. And then also, I mean, you can see the inconsistencies within like religious dogma and religious officials where you're like, oh, they say this thing, but people are flawed and they don't follow these paths, and they're clearly, the chosen by God in some sense to like at least deliver the word. And so, um, yeah. And I think I also learned early on, like, because there's so many different sects of Christianity and so many different ways that people practice the same thing, and then noticing how they try, like, this is coming off of like after 9/11, for example, and everybody jumping on anyone that they thought was Muslim and or Arab. And then like later on you're like, wait, but we all practice an Abrahamic faith. Like technically we all worship the same God in some way, shape, or form. What the fuck is going on here? And that being very confusing to me is also a point where I was like, something's not adding up. Like I can think independently, but it seems like the purpose of creating these specific factions is so that we do not think independently. And that wasn't a conclusion I came to in high school. That's something that like I'm inspecting at the end of high school, and then sort of realize more broadly in my young adult life.
Okay, I will echo that certainly one of the most, abrupt ways to break your faith in something is to confront its hypocrisy. So I'll echo that and then do an add on about like another thing of what sort of pushed me to the okay, I won't be struck by lightning moment. But I was going to a school in which was mired in the like Bernie Madoff crisis, and his accomplice Merkin, his like grandson or something, went to my high school and was running for treasurer of the secretary, like treasurers for the student council, and made a video where he was like, and the Merkins are good with money, and I was just like, these are vile people, and they are using the synagogue and this daily life completely as a front. um and I was a bit of an outcast because I'm coming from Georgia, so these New York kids are like asking me if in middle school if I like had water from a well. Like truly, New Yorkers are a strange bunch. But I I thank God I was an outcast. I mean, sometimes I wonder, like, yeah, early acceptance is a really, really bad thing in life, even if it's hard. Because that let me sort of see it as an outsider and like study, and I'm like, these are the most hypocritical people. And Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer, like her dad was also part of my school community, and I think that was a huge thing. And then a second thing was, and I think about this a bit, how like, and I really, really, I think I have deprogrammed my mind officially this year. I think this marks the year of the deprogramming of thinking there is a normal reality, or that like there is some like normal mode you can retreat to. And every time I sort of go to my, um, I mean, I think sometimes I might be like idealistic in certain ways, but there, even if you are or aren't an idealist with what you think is possible to accomplish in your lifetimes, or like what revolutionary change can happen, there is still no normal reality to go to. And as Jackson pointed out, like high school is a religion, and just in general, everything we do is a syncretism of different types of like faiths and expressions, like nonstop all the time. And something I had in high school was like, yeah, I was going to religious school during the day, but I was watching Skins at night, and I had like a friend who was introducing me to the Velvet Underground, and I was getting into like this sort of hedonistic, like you do stuff with your friends and you don't really, then if you have a friend, you can do anything, and you should be doing anything, and you shouldn't even be thinking, you should just be hearing a song in your head as you're doing it. Like if you're thinking any thoughts, you're doing it wrong, because that's like not what happens in Skins. But I just remember one weekend I texted my best friend and nothing happened, and I was like, it's over, it's done. I'm texting on Shabbat, I'm doing the whole thing. And I think like that is not very thoughtful, but that was the syncretism of the time. Religious school during the day, and this like thoughtless, hedonistic teenage religion of America that was influencing another part of my personality and really like pushed me. And I'm curious right now. I think a lot, I don't think we'll have like a pure distillation of maybe the vision of reality you want to see, but we all have the capacity to like push the forms of syncretism that, we'll participate in our lifetime. And it's very cool to see what comes out of that over time. What can come out of religious syncretism, I suppose. Like Abrahamic faiths, all the different variations of it, or like Mayan meets Catholic churches. It's like if you see it from a distance over thousands of years, it's amazing.
I agree. Okay, so like a big part of my belief is that like we live in a world that is the conglomeration of every entity's, beliefs. Like you combine every individual's beliefs and then you divide it by however many individuals there are and you get reality. So like if I accept that this is the way that things work, then oftentimes I'm led instinctually to the idea that okay, well, I got to get with a bunch of my like-minded friends and peers and like work to generate the world the way that we want it to be. And that's all well and good, but the problem is family. Because like your parents bring their own perspectives about what should be. And your family is the problem because um you it's the one arbitrarily assigned unit of individuals that you cannot simply say I don't care about them. Like I can go to my friends and form the best reality possible for us, but then there's my parents and my family still. Because yeah, I have this bond that's been built into me, scarred into me, branded into me. And so I can't just say like, "Oh, bye y'all," cuz I'll feel horrible about myself, you know? And like not to say that you can't abandon your biological family, um, but it takes a significant risk and significant, you know, energy to do so. And so I feel like that's kind of where this kind of conversation brings us a little bit when it comes to family and when it comes to this idea of like revelation and this idea of finding your own way your own relationship to God, your own relationship to divinity. It's always tempered by your relationship to your family, just because like you know it's something that a lot of people are indoctrinated to believe, and kind of I don't disagree with. You owe your family as good of a try as you can give them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Um,
Yeah. I think, yeah. I think the first thing that I have on the tip of my tongue is just that while family is the unit by which you are like biologically bound and maybe shapes how you process things and like sort of introduces you in or gives you some sort of key into society that helps you shape how you understand reality. I do think that it is easier for some to relinquish that, but in that like departure, you are forced to take whatever causes that departure and like accumulate maybe the opposite if you're leaving from like a very negative family experience, right? And fuse that in. And maybe one thing to clarify how I was understanding you, Jackie, is that maybe regardless of what the family experience is, it is quite literally your only roadmap to deciding or understanding the landscape, or your first roadmap to understanding the landscape. And whatever happens there is tied to how you proceed with digesting everybody else's lineage and individual ideas and the synchronicity or the what was the word you used, Celia? Sorry.
Oh, syncretism?
Syncretism. I don't think I know what that means, but I'm gonna just say that from context clues, it is portions of your identity fusing into you. Am I good so far? And like being projected outward to some extent.
It's like the merging or overlap of different practices or faiths or religions. Or it could be the self and outside the self as well.
Yeah, because I'm saying that like in order to create that syncretism, when you leave your family, you still have that whatever that loss is. That's still part of how you understand other people's layering, right? Like someone who has a good relationship to their family confronts someone who has a terrible relationship with their family, and they don't see eye to eye in one way. There is a way in which the person understanding that individual is like, oh, they act this way because they have a loving family, right? Like people say that often about maybe not very critical thinkers in some ways. They're like, oh, they had a very good upbringing. They don't have to think deeply about, why things are fucked up, and therefore they can move with a level of freedom that I'm not afforded, but I can understand them because of X, Y, and Z context within which I have experienced. All of that is to say, I think that family matters a lot to as like a stepping stone, but not quite the like end all be all. Like I think it's like the like you can build another foundation around that foundation and then remove it altogether if we're going to use like architectural like logic to try to thread that long-winded needle.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this like a lot today in that, you have this conundrum, you go through these cycles with your family. Like when Jackson and I were first talking about this last week, like at this point, my family and I have been through, I think, the two cycles of mutation, in that um I have mutated and in numerous forms. I was I mean I when I had a very serious Catholic boyfriend in college, that was like extraordinarily difficult for my mom, because that sort of raised into question like purity of lineage, and like what would the, if there were children, like what would they be raised as. And
Wait, but you win though. You win that argument. They would be Jewish. Technically, right?
Like if they converted?
You win ethnically, I think.
I think
No,
like
right?
technically, but it's no longer a like, that's the world of like, it doesn't matter what you do, at least you're Jewish, It's like it's murky. It's
Yeah, because the irony of that, which I don't know if you were about to say, but I'm just gonna rob that punchline from you. The irony of that line of thinking is that when Celia and Zach, friend of the show, started to be together and live together and stuff, it's like from what Celia told me, like their parents were like, "Oh, thank God," like it's a nice Jewish boy. But the irony is that like uh, Zach and Celia both are like as like independent from the concept of Judaism as you can be, of course, while retaining, because I mean, you got to draw from something, and so like there's plenty of interesting stuff within the tradition of Judaism. Once again, just to reiterate this point one more time, but like they're not orthodox. You know what I mean? So like there's no guarantee that being Jewish is going to be fitting into your orthodox view of what Judaism is more or less so than being any other thing, especially like, Catholic or Muslim, right?
and it's and what I was saying to Jackson, we were on the phone last week, like, yes. So this is what I mean, like I mutated to, like, my mom would, say to me, you don't have a soul. You're ending like thousands of years of history to like welcome back to the family, and like we love. I don't even know. I met Zach once. He sounds great, and like, to like
Wait,
it's the
really?
right. Yeah, yeah. I was like immediately like a completely different relationship.
So it
And
was like you were so like when you were dating a Catholic guy, it was like you were ending thousands of years of lineage, like from your mother's perspective.
yes, very, very much so. There was no middle ground to it at all. I was young, so I think there was the idea that like maybe he would convert, what she would bring up, but she referred to him as as a Russian fairy tale character. She wouldn't refer to him by his name. He was the tall tree from a
Wait,
Russian
what's
fairy
the fairy
tale.
tale character?
Yeah.
Daddy Storpa. It's like
The tall was it like a tree person, like an ent?
like yeah,
I don't.
you like
Dang.
Can you say the
I'll
word
like
again?
it's like a Dajistopa. It's like a type of like sort of fantastical tree.
Damn, that's
Um,
wild.
and I was like, that's rude.
It's kind of
This is
sick
rude
though.
on so many levels.
It's kind of
And
cool.
it was really like, but the writing's very on the wall that in no way will a next generation be raised with the values that they imparted. Like it's just coincident, like maybe there's one more 70 years of this like purity lineage, but then it's like then it's really really over, because it's just like the probabilistically, especially if you're not raised with those values. Like I somewhat I got together with my current Jewish partner in 2020 after I'd been living away from home for 6 years. So there might have been at least like the spark of like, oh my God, everyone's gonna die. Like, I'm gonna play it. I'm gonna play it by the book. But I'm not gonna raise my kids if I have them with that book. So I think like the short-sightedness there is really personally embarrassing to that generation. And it's like the nuclear family logic kind of playing in, just like you're just good if this is all you see, never thinking ahead, never really thinking that far behind. Um, and yeah, I think like the oh, and then in terms of the mutating, is that in this year as well, I've had to like I think my parents went from being in my mind sort of like conservative, different values, to like Zionism isn't normal. It's another form of fascism. It'll be looked at, I hope, in the same way. I hope that we have a day where like Zionism and German fascism and like American fascism can all be seen as different forms of like the same root evil. Um, Instead of just like, yeah, we conquered evil in World War II. Um, but in that, I've really had to like contend. I like my parents mutated in my mind to like the worst forms of evil that I grew up sort of learning about, and then they've at various times sort of been like a little bit more. Well, now what? Now that they're this, I guess they're still humans.
Hmm.
Blah
Mm.
blah.
Yeah. Okay. That's
And
really
that sort of
interesting.
process.
I think that's a really interesting iteration of the idea of the mutant as being a kind of a visual category. Again, something that you see and something that like shapes the way that you see, but also it's the way that you're seen. Um, because like ultimately we are all technically mutants, but only some of us are seen as mutants. So that's just something I want to highlight as far as
Yeah,
the
no, it's completely like in your life, whether it's valuable or not, and maybe you guys as, mutant scholars can speak to this, but I think like I went beyond the pale, like of the boundaries of what my mom could accept as part of her community, and fascists are beyond the pale of what I can accept in my community. And there is not that there isn't like interaction that's productive and that I wouldn't, de-radicalizing is like a valuable and complex process, but like you have to live with boundaries, right? In a sense. Like I feel like sometimes it if you don't have boundaries of what you accept. And that's how I've come to understand my mom too. Like I came to accept if I'm outside of her purview then that's fair because I want to have things that are outside of my purview of community too, as well.
So, what are these points? What are these points at which... Can we expand upon these points at which that you saw your parents and your family as like beyond the pale, beyond what you identify as your community, and vice versa? Like, because there's this idea floating around that sometimes if you show your family your true self, sometimes they will stretch their bonds and their levels of acceptability, and they will evolve because you are planting the flag in your identity. But then there are also times when they will not, and you know, so it's interesting to see that mutually. It's interesting to see yourself be rejected and then to reject your family. On, you know, maybe both like on grounds that are deeply committed. You know, if you're interested in, once again, this is, you know, an optional thing. We could definitely edit this out, but like, if you're interested in going into this conflict more deeply, I think it would be really interesting. Like, where were the points at which you became alien to your parents, and at which your parents became alien to you? And how did the relationship persist, if at all?
Mm. Yeah, I think that I don't know. It's like there's no going back from death. There's no going back from this year. It's an interesting thing when they were capitalists, like they are capitalists, very proudly so. They're very like Reagan capitalists who, believe in America in that way, and like that kills like millions of people each year. I don't even know the number, just like between various in various ways. War, malnutrition, etc., tons of things. But like that was like okay, that is normalized. But here's this like I guess it's just the question of like can war I knew the war wasn't normalized, so it just wasn't like I don't know, it just went beyond the pale, like the brutality of it. I don't believe that it's part of their normal world. I think they're in the process of trying to make it more normal, so I have the ability to remind them that it's not normal, and that a lot of like it's just like they're pushing something that isn't actually normal to seem that way. So then that I just kind of want to. I'm gonna actually think on that for a second. If you want to like add anything,
I did. I
either
did
of
it
you.
once again. Like, this is the predicament that a lot of people find themselves in right now, and me as myself very much included. Because when you have Kamala presented as like a good option, but she is being explicitly pro-Zionist, pro-genocide, then then I, again, as like a person who's raised by like agnostic, like woo woo kind of hippie-ish, you know, wasps, um, face my family's Zionism because they don't they, as long as it's a cool enough avatar, it doesn't matter what she's purporting. So, this is a very pertinent, very relevant kind of discussion to be having for like a lot of Americans, a lot of leftists right now, where they're looking at their family and they're saying, "You guys are on board for this? Like, do you see what's happening, right?"
Yeah, and I've come to definitely just in general believe that I I feel a very like deep pain about feeling that people are left alone, and due to the nuclear family and like moving to a new country, my folks don't have that many people, so I'll always be there to a degree. But I think more like what world shaped them and what needs to change so that the world is different for another generation. Um I try not to think back too much. I think like there's something like deeply, deeply unnatural about trying to change your parents.
Can I ask a question that I struggle with to
Hmm.
maybe both of you? Um, I struggle with the idea of killing the dreams and or ideals of my parents and my parents' generation. And if we're talking about the presidency, like this is for black people, Obama and now Kamala, right? Who are two like people thinking about the civil rights movement and the idea of how far we've come to black people running the nation, but also black people running the nation as I've grown to understand it as warmongers, right? And trying to reconcile that these dreams are like dreams of identity, and especially in DC, right, like a place that is very steeped in what optics are, like the optics and the progress being like almost tied to the representation, right? I think you can distill that into just, if I were to spend the rest of my life trying to convince them that these markers are illusory and that we should be pushing them away and like trying to get better, like it shouldn't just be any old black person, it should be the best black person it could be, and maybe talk through the reasons why it can't be that person, and the idea of maybe setting them back hundreds of, or not hundreds, but like setting them back decades of work and progress and effort that I'm saying is futile now in this context. It feels it feels like I'm doing them a disservice as they enter into a more stable part of their lives, right? It feels like I am trying to depress them and trying to run, like, spread my sadness and like trying to keep them in a state of despair that in many black people would say is contemptuous of me because I am not allowing hope to live in the community of an oppressed people, right? And I think, yeah, maybe I'll stop there. But does that resonate? Where it's like, I feel like, how do you feel about potentially killing the dreams of your parents and their predecessors, and questioning the efficacy of all of the work they've done?
Yeah, I think okay, two things are coming to mind. One of which was I was with my family for Rosh Hashanah on Thursday. I almost got kicked out of the synagogue for wearing my JVP shirt, which is really loud and obnoxious, to be fair. Like in very big white letters, ceasefire now, but I actually think a keffiyeh would have been more subtle and classy. I should have done that, but because it's like all over my shirt or done both or something. But I got to stay there. The Rebbitzin was like, we can't kick her out.
If you were
But
male passing, you could have like a kafia pattern,
totally,
yeah.
that would have been like just the whole shebang. Um, I'm also on the male side. Yeah. So I went to do that, and I was with my brother-in-law and my family, and my brother-in-law is like an anarcho-capitalist, sort of like
A
very
crypto
Gen
finance
X,
bro.
crypto finance surfer bro. My sister actually does listen to this pod, so
Yo,
all
shout
love
out.
to
We had a really
Bam.
good.
That's
What
so
was the occasion that like I was at? I was,
You came. I don't know why
but I had a really I like
You came
vibed with.
on Mother's Day
Oh yeah,
to
Mother's
my
Day. Shout out your
sister.
sister and also your mother, both wonderful hosts.
And like you were, I think, completely hungover. You and Zach were both wearing sunglasses, and
I think I left.
I love this.
I feel like I left a pretty good impression. Although the night before, I had left a very bad impression with all Celia's cool friends. So yeah.
What? Wait, hold on. I need this story. Can we take a
No,
we
pod
no. This just
tangent?
has to do with like
distracted. Oh.
ADHD, bipolar, self medicating with alcohol, like being an alcoholic, like overdoing it and having manic phases. No matter in any kind of tense social situation where there's lots of alcohol available. I am not a safe person to have around because I will ruin the vibes disastrously.
We love it.
Damn.
We love it. Um, yeah, we went to Mother's Day, and my sister loves Jackson because they're Gen Xers. They're like also there's a relation of like supreme nihilism. And when I talk to them about like they talk to me about college, and I'm like, that's when I like learned that like capitalism was bad. And I'm like, what were you guys up to? And they're like, we were pieing people in the face. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
anyways,
Mm-hmm.
my brother-in-law was like, I don't understand your generation. I never used to, because I was saying that I don't think I could, like, I think I was talking about like the difficulty with like having different politics with family, and that I don't um think I could like date someone who had like different, vastly different politics. And I guess for me that's like it's actually like I do need feel like I need to share that. And my brother-in-law was like, I don't understand that. I don't think me and your sister talked about politics until like a year into being married. Like no one in my generation, or at least from my memory from being him, like it was not like a common thing. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like people now will talk about their politics just very immediately. And then wait, I actually don't even remember how we got here. Was there a question we left off on? I completely don't remember. I do remember that there was a question about breaking the ideals of
Yeah,
your folk. Oh,
yeah, I asked I was like, I don't know if I should interject because you were telling a great story.
I remember.
Um,
It was
okay.
that like there's an ideal of family being able to transcend politics, and when you show up and you're just like, I feel like I have to like I cannot not. But my brother-in-law was sort of speaking to the like, what is wrong with you? Why can't you ever not be political? Like even that like breaking of your parents' ideals is in itself. Why can't you just avoid that? So all that to say is
Right.
I wonder how much is generational, and then B, uh, um, although I do think like radical culture like ebbs and flows. Like my great grandparents, and this will bring into the emissary. My great grandparents in Russia were radicals. Then it like sifts, and the next thing you know, a few generations later, they're Reagan Americans, and then I'm like two generations later, and it's like back to being like whatever interested in like leftism. But my cat's being weird. What I was gonna say though is that lastly, yeah, I don't think you should break. I think you should be nice. I think you should be nice to your parents and sort of just like let them feel the like. I think you should focus on changing the world And then like if your parents are going to like live through the consequences of that, that's how you know it actually happened. Because if you just like get caught up with fighting with them, you will not really do all that much, and they're sort of like the passionate emotions that emerges is a good, it gives you clarity, but it's like how, yeah, I don't know, but I think I vacillate with like how much am I just being neurotic by ruining their world and getting fixated on that. Came
Mm-hmm.
up a few days
Yeah.
ago.
I think that's definitely something to diagnose with like the left. Is that people like fixate on like we've seen it in the past like through social media as like kind of a mimetic kind of call to action was like you know uh change your family's perspective or whatever. And I think it is kind of a Freudian, Jungian. You can see all these different. It's kind of a. It seems like kind of a adolescent approach. Is like oh, we just gotta change our family's perspectives. As if it's that simple. But leading by
Also like
example is
our, yeah,
is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, I agree with all of this. What were you gonna say, Celia? I'll let you go
just
first.
like, okay, just two things really quickly. Yeah, that like liberal sort of change your parents' perspective is very beautiful if you have like open-minded parents.
Right,
But our
right.
parents, I think what I'm trying to get to is like most of our parents were shaped by extraordinarily violent realities, are reacting to that. Our world is a consequence of that. There is no normal reality. We live in an incredibly violent world that has its own like faith and rituals that it practices to, normalize and make a reality out of it. And I just don't think there's that much rationality that's actually even there at a baseline for many people to even like have that conversation with their parents with. A and B, I just watched an incredible movie that I just want to shout out, which was called Wild Relatives by Jumana Mana. And it was about like it just sort of made these connections between a family that was moving from Aleppo to Lebanon and trying to preserve like the seeds from a farming family, but it was just so much more profitable to make a like lease land as a refugee camp that didn't have any agricultural land than to actually like let people like grow food and use their seeds. And this is all over the world. It's more profitable to have like monopolies over agriculture than letting people grow food locally. But yeah, I just think about like also the worlds in which our, like, my parents never really made America home. Like they did what they like did to survive and like make a profit here, but it's not home and they're not connected to the land. And like how much can you just
Mm,
ask from people who have such little like
yeah.
like baseline of what it means to be like a human person connected to community and their land?
Yeah, and
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 some of
like
that is not their fault.
and again, like I do want to connect this to like America specifically because I feel like that is like a through line you can see from the national parks episode through the curse episode and into the present is that we have like one of America's like kind of universal principles is that you become alienated from the land in a way that can be profitable. It can be either profitable or like a debt. So like you're either in debt or you're profiting from a certain alienation from the land. But like that is like you can trace that from like the foundations of America, where like you're mutating the world around you from the moment you set foot upon American soil. And in so doing, you are either like aligning yourself with the um, contract of God, or you are falling out of favor with God. I don't know, just some kind of like random uh, kind of blind shots at this kind of American project that we have here. But I do I resonate with the idea of being like kind of alienated from your primary sustenance as an American. I feel like that is kind of one of the parts of the like American contract. Um, yes,
Your parents are farmers.
yeah, and this is coming from a biodynamic. Like my parents were, um, they lived many years of my life as biodynamic farmers in Wisconsin. Biodynamic farming being something that was like developed by an Austrian thinker called Rudolf Steiner, also involved with Waldorf schools. And he had this idea, this circular form of farming that's supposed to be like sustainable because like you have the goats eating 1/4 of the land, you have them eating it all up and eating all the weeds, and then also fertilizing it because they're shitting everywhere. And then the next season you rotate them to the next quarter, and then the quarter that they were previously on, you might like grow something that uses their manure as like fertilizer, right? This idea of like circular farming and the entire farm is one organism, and that all has like different parts that work towards one whole. So it's a pretty cool model of farming. Um, but the thing is that like the place that I lived at and my parents lived at, um, how are you supposed to support yourself? You support yourself by getting grants from the state because you're conserving different parts of the land, or B, through selling vegetables. And it's very difficult to sell vegetables when you're competing with fucking, bigger, more nutritious, like less pest ridden, like more reliable, more easily delivered, etc., etc., etc. vegetables. So what are we doing with this whole biodynamic thing, right? Like, what the fuck are we doing here? Um, uh, so that's an example of the alienation that you feel from the land, even if you are like doing as close to the land as you could possibly be, both spiritually and like physically. You're still alienated from it, and that's like part of the American contract, the American curse.
It's not unique to Jews, but I do think that something I think about is like how long Jews have not had a healthy connection to the land in which they have lived, and that is even an older story than like the advent of industrialization, though that plays into the Jewish story, but like the consistent moving and expulsion and then being brought in again, and like how
Mm-hmm.
uh
There's this idea of
yeah.
rootedness, right? There's this idea of being rooted to a place. Like this is where you
Yeah.
set down roots. And that's part of the kind of fantasy that I see a lot of people like, again, like even with this like, because another irony of the farm community that my family was a part of in Wisconsin was that this commune would like within my lifetime it's gone through like four different sets of like couples who tried to be like the administrators of the place, because inevitably some kind of politics erupts from within the commune and disrupts the entire thing, and that inevitably at some point these idealistic couple that comes in and tries to be the stewards of this land realizes this is such a bad idea because I'm not going to be earning anything for myself or my children at all. And so, like, what the hell am I doing here? And then on top of that, there's all these different political, like striving for control that is like intrinsic to like the heart of this type of commune. So, like, again, like you can't escape it. I had like a really like influential adjunct professor in college who was like really, really meaningful to me. But she talks a lot about rootlessness, and she's from an Orthodox Jewish background. And she says that like being unrooted, right? I think that's like that's the stereotype of like the Jewish person in like classical literature, but also it like I
The
think
rootless
speaks really well.
cosmopolitan.
What was that?
The rootless cosmopolitan
Exactly,
coming
but I
to
mean
a city near you.
it also it's effectively affected infected America on large, right? That's my point. Like even the most rooted example you could think of, this biodynamic, organic, farm that's like a CSA that's giving you vegetables from the earth. That itself cannot sustain more than like 4 years of the same leadership couple before it's cycled out. Someone else comes in, steps in, tries to do the thing their way, right? Like it's really hard to find rootedness in America.
Truly. Yeah. And I think to maybe this is a little bit of a tangent, but what I hear kind of abstractly from this is this conflict between lineage and legacy, right? Like you have a lineage of people who are, or I guess the human lineage is to be connected to the land, yield its fruits, and somehow prosper from it in one way or another, right? But then, as you know, the project of society slash civilization, and broadly capitalist enterprise, the idea of one's legacy being I would like my people to also be on this land transcends into or mutates into something that's like I need my people to survive because all these other processes are at work. There's this sense that the American enterprise is about uprooting everything from, the parks episode, right? We don't want this place to be peopled, but we also need it to be almost a relic of our conquest, right? And potential terrain for new conquest. We need everything to be uprooted, shuffled around so that we can replace those roots with like I don't know, like fixtures, right? We want stone statues that reference the roots that once were there, but are like beacons for, I guess entrepreneurs and people who have gained and created the infrastructure within which everybody else follows. So when it comes to when I'm thinking about this farm and how this say like this new couple, this new idealistic couple comes in and they can never sustain it over 4 years, they're confronting like okay, we are the ones who are going to make this lineage of death into a legacy of life that has been rooted in a people and land relationship, but that doesn't work when you've got damn, I'm gonna butcher that word. I'm not gonna use it.
Biotin,
When you've got
no.
no, not biodynamics. This was about the synchron. um, say it, please, Celia.
Syncra. Syncretism.
Syncra.
It's it's
Syncretism.
not synchronicity. Syncretism. Fuck. It's like
Syncretic.
it's the syncretic. It's the conflict of syncretisms, right? Where it's like these are late. Like there's a battle happening here, and it's they're taking up the mantle of a losing battle. And I think that is the story of any type of person that is trying to live outside of or trying to reshape or combat a colonial system that has the hallmarks of success that create the problems, right? Like you're saying, like I can't even sell vegetables because the enterprise of America has taken that, operationalized it, and been like, this doesn't belong to any people. This belongs to an idea, and that's the corporation. That's Dole or whatever corporation you've got that's going to be able to take seeds, spread the GMOs or whatever, like conquer farms, take the idea of colonialism and spread it everywhere. Now, if we bring it back into like family structures, we have people coming into this enterprise as like, fuck, like I am landless, but I can conceptualize a legacy of my family by incorporating myself into a system that is like wholly violent, but in sort of putting myself adjacent to that violence, I'm able to sustain my own personal legacy, right? Like you commit to a level of disconnection that promises safety and security only so far as we know, but it promises it to some way, shape, or form. And we as the next generation come into this and we're saying we have the conflict of saying to our families, look, like your commitment to this enterprise that has sustained us is insane, unsustainable, bad, stop doing this. And it is it's a challenging feat because you're right, Celia, like we've got to change the world first and then the family structures follow. But like, there's a great sadness that I feel that the folks that are supposed to be pioneers, I'm trying to call back to when you're saying that there are young Zionists, for example, there's a young Republican contingency, right? Like, there are these grand ideals, like they are also procreating, and the like, I don't want to call them demons, but the people that have these very imperialist ideals, these ideals that come with the legacy of what's kept their families safe, that's fed their families, and doctrines that tell them that this is the right way because it is safe, right? Like, how do you argue with those people? And you kind of have to defeat them, but that's its own problem. One last thing that I wanted to say is, like, when we talk about legacy, I think a lot about Hill staffers in this moment of, like, this electoral moment and this genocidal moment in the US. And I'm like, if every person that was like 25 and under decided to not go to work on the basis of like the American project in Israel right now or in Palestine, like it would halt the infrastructure of the government because they're doing grunt work. But I cannot remember it's syncretism. There we go. The syncretisms that they're working with attach them to, I need to do this so that I can be in charge. I'm following this path because of all of the belief systems that are coming through to me. And these antagonistic ones are just like markers of like how they're name making, basically, is what I'm trying to say. They're all trying to name make in some way, shape, or form. So they'll eat the piles of shit thinking that they're fertilizing ground for their future growth. And when we tell them that that's not possible, we look crazy or sign ourselves up for destruction. And I will stop there. I've been talking for way too fucking long.
Okay, first of all, no such thing on this sort of podcast. Second of all, I just want to officially banish the concept that we will at all deal with the emissary or the cranes are flying in this episode.
I'm gonna reference the cranes are flying.
These are gonna be.
I'm gonna rush into the emissary.
Okay, I'll be quick. So, obviously, The Cranes Are Flying begins with a scene of
Will
The
you tell the
birds
audience
flying.
what the cranes are flying is?
The cranes are flying. Yes, I will say what the cranes are flying. Lital Zuravli is like a Soviet anti-war film, I think from the late 50s, that faced censorship, but was ultimately released, and it is about a couple that is torn apart as the young boyfriend, they're about to get married, but he goes off to fight for the motherland. And in Russia, this is known as the Great Patriotic War. It's not even known as World War II. It was like for fighting for the soul, or like the continuation of the Soviet Union in Russia. And the girlfriend stays behind. She actually marries a narcissistic pianist for a hot sec. And is like,
Narcissistic. I mean,
yeah.
this guy's just good at the piano. I mean, narcissistic. That seems like a projection. I mean, oh my
He's
goodness.
playing the piano while his brothers are at war for Russia.
Oh, so you're
Um,
okay.
he was. I think he could have been a more interesting
Oh, so you're
character if he
tanky.
wasn't.
Oh, so you're a tanky.
So,
Just kidding.
well, I think the idea was like there are things that are appropriate to do in wartime and things that are inappropriate to do, and I completely agree with that notion, and that is the true. Okay, but now that everyone knows what the cranes are flying are,
Yeah.
I'll just say really quick that ultimately the film ends with like the spoiler alert. Turn quiet the pod if you don't want a spoiler to the cranes are flying. Famed 1957 anti-war Soviet film. But
if you haven't seen this yet, then I don't know. Like you've had what, like
Veronica.
you've had like 63 years to watch it.
Yeah, it's been around your whole life, unless you're one of the few pre-1957 listeners. But the boyfriend dies. Obviously, she leaves the pianist. It's like and the movie begins with the cranes are flying in an arrow direction, and it ends with it flying in an arrow. And it also ends with one of the boyfriend's friends saying that like, and now we will honor all the people who are lost, and we'll never have war again. Obviously, this is like ridiculous because very immediately afterwards it's the intensity of the Cold War, and of course, knowing Russian history right now, it's like endless war for even somehow less ideals than all the wars in the 20th century. But all that to say is like what the common understanding or like the conflict that comes from beginning and ending the scene with the cranes are flying in this arrow direction is like, is it sort of symbolic of um the fact that things are always moving forward. Like the movie ends with her having flowers for her boyfriend who she just prays is coming back from the army, and she just ends up having to give it away to like random people because he's not back. And it's like, is this a sign of growth? Like she's expanded her capacity to love, she's matured? Or do the arrows represent the birds flying? Is that just like the sort of indifference of the passing of time? And I think that when I think about it in relation to generations, like I would hate to live through the indifferent passing of time. And I just hope that in my time alive, I can like show time moving forward, because I think in some ways, I think about my grandparents experiencing the end of World War II, and I think about even like the intensity of moving to America from Russia. And I just like, I want that rush myself, and that obviously means that your aims have to be like so much higher than anything you can experience in like an individualized atomized existence. um but that is not completely in your hands, obviously. And also though, but it takes learning from the past. So I think just going back to like why, at least far as I know, many of my, I'm more likely to have a friend who's going to spend a day playing video games than being like, I'm going to join a commune in upstate New York, partly because I think we've like, whatever, maybe lack of like capacity, and also these that didn't work. It didn't work in a lot of the 60s and 70s. These experiments in like small communes or experiments did not spread and cause the change that people wanted to see, so people aren't trying to recreate it. But we have to then like doing something completely different so that we feel time moving forward is something I'm like very keen on experiencing cinematically, realistically.
I think that that's not only beautiful. I think that that ties in a lot where like how experiencing time moving forward and being maybe a pioneer of that, right? Like, is that what am I hearing you correctly?
I mean, I'd be happy to be in the crowd of it, you know. In the film she's just in the crowd giving away flowers. I'd be so down to do that. But I want to see it and yeah, like be there.
Yeah.
And how much can you do
Right.
if you're spending it like arguing with your parents, you can't experience it.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah.
like recreating what they experimented with or not doing anything.
Mm-hmm. There's an element of being mired in the past when you're trying constantly to be referential to it it being the past or past faults, past flaws, and trying to correct a period of time that has already passed. I'm thinking about the movie, right? Like, if she had spent time like critiquing the system, right, she would have kind of been.
Yeah, she just like I think she just moved um it just yeah, it ends with supposedly the last war that they'll, you know, they fought the Great Patriotic War. It should be the last war. She's giving away flowers. She sort of completely left the notion of like any selfish relationship to existence. And isn't that just like the highest of heights?
I
But it
mean,
ends
okay.
there.
Okay. I can't help but bring in my own dour analysis here.
I had a dour one too, but continue.
On one hand, you see the ending where she has brought flowers to this point of her erstwhile lover's return, potentially. All these soldiers are coming back from the war. She's brought flowers to the scene to try to give them to him. She's met by a soldier who her, erstwhile lover has given her photo to, who has himself brought flowers for her on behalf of her erstwhile lover. So he gives her the flowers, and, it's that moment of recognition of like, okay, this man is actually dead. And, as far as her knowledge. And, yeah, so now she has like this excess of flowers, the ones she brought and the ones that were given to her by her lover's friend. And then she just starts handing them out in this moment of rapture, right? So, to random people, she's like, you have a flower, you have a flower, you have a flower. So like you could see this as like this ultimate like like stripping away of the ego and realizing that and ascending to this perspective that anyone who receives love is worthy of it, right? I'm handing out these flowers, and everyone who I hand them to in this moment of reconciliation, the boys coming home from war, each person I hand these flowers to is deserving of it. Whether it's the like old grandma or the like, you know, woman who herself didn't have her boyfriend come back from the war, or a random like, like I don't know, paper maker or whatever it is. Um, the alternative to seeing that is that the symbol of handing out flowers is ultimately degraded at that last moment, where she is completely broken down to the point where handing out the flowers to begin with is completely meaningless, because the whole reason why she wanted to bring the flowers to begin with is no longer there. And that is the very reason why she was handed flowers, and her being handed flowers actually symbolizes loss and ultimate depravity, the meaninglessness of war. And I'm reminded of this when I watched this movie. I thought about Starship Troopers and the because just like in Starship Troopers, in The Cranes Are Flying, we see a young man, who voluntarily decides to go to war, and all those around him are trying to keep him from going to war. But he says, "No, I want to go to war. That's what I want to do." He wasn't drafted, he wasn't forced to go to war. He decided to go to war. And he was in love with somebody, allegedly, and she was definitely in love with him. But he said, "No, I want to go to war instead." That is such a heartbreaking reality, right? Like, because what it really represents is that everything in this reality, including the one who I allegedly love, who loves me, is not worth it. I would rather die. So like it's ultimately like a huge indictment of the world of the world in which they originally lived, that he would go to war to begin with. And I think that is like the most devastating like understanding of that like that movie brings, is that like the reality to begin with is worth just throwing away.
I hear you on that. I think the only way I try to push back on that is when Stepan makes his speech about how all of the people died for the victory and freedom of everybody else, right? Like it's trying to frame that death as a sacrifice. So like he loves her enough to add to the potential that she remains free, right? And like when if we zoom into like her specific situation and like at this end, like I started to read it as like she became consumed by the state in a certain way. Like she's just become like an example of like how while we have suffered great losses, I, as a symbol of Russia, have persevered and I spread my like you all can have my joy because I have none left, right? War has taken joy from me, but victory has brought you joy, right? And that's how I saw it, where it was like it's depressing in the sense that like the great loss makes an individual into nothing, like her waiting for him, her hopes, her dreams were consumed by war, but the idea that the victory is what she offers everybody else, like this is like how we live in community together, like
Right,
I
right.
give up so that you can all live. But anyway, that's it. That's my only rebuttal. I'm
No,
done.
I mean
I'll shut up now.
that's fair. That's fair. Like the thing is that like a communist cause is the cause that I would see this on the balance as being potentially hopeful. But any other cause, I'd be like, this is so tragic. But I think that
Well,
even it being like an ideal that I agree with, even it being like a communist ideal that I think is worthwhile to sacrifice for, it still is very tragic to me.
yeah, something we probably don't have much time to talk about, but I have thought about at times like um it's interesting because I guess the biggest differentiation with Judaism and Christianity is the whole Jesus thing. But since I didn't grow up with Jesus, I never think about that and like don't really get the centrality of it.
Hmm.
Um, but and I actually think about like the different relationship to family in the Old and New Testament is probably to me like a much more starker contrast in that the Old Testament implies like repeatedly, and maybe there's contradictions in the New Testament, and I've definitely read the New Testament less thoroughly than the Old one, um, which I read in non chronological, nonsensical cycles throughout middle and high school. But it's like repeated that like honor your father and mother. This it's like in the Ten Commandments, whereas as far as I understand, both in like Matthew and Luke and in various moments in the New Testaments, and it's implied that if you love your family or son or your own life more than you love like this like practice of Jesus, then you cannot actually be one of the like disciples or part of the faith. And I think that's like a much starker contrast than if Jesus did the resurrection thing or not, because that is like really shapes how you live. Like, is it first that you have to maintain aspects of order and connection and like social harmony before chasing your even any ideal, or in fact to chase that ideal do you have to put that above any personal connection you have? And that's like, I feel like that's just a way more like question of like how one lives one's daily reality.
What do you guys think?
I think that my reverence for my older relatives and parents, etc., comes from the idea that nothing I could say to them would resonate as anything other than the babblings of an idealistic child. And they believe that they have wisdom over what I would see as knowledge, right? Or what have you. And instead of sowing a different type of derision, I must be faithful to an ideal enough to show them that I am correct. And when I become undeniable, then it won't be this knowledge, this, ideal versus wisdom conversation anymore. It is just reality and the conflict of, reckoning with truth. And I think that's an easier fight to have than dealing with potential futures and long term aspects of growth. Where I'm like, when I think of, if we're sorry, no, I'm going on a tangent. But does that make sense?
Yeah, and like I think what comes to mind um with the question of like should the honor be there? It's like such a, maybe this is too much of a binary, like honor versus complete denunciation so that you can go and live by your.
No, but this is a tension that I think is very important. And like to reiterate, because I forgot myself a little bit, but like, yeah, the tension is between honor for your society versus
Mm.
your own intrinsic like validation, which sometimes aligns, but you know, let's assume it doesn't align.
I think that I hold both in that um or try to hold both, like growing like if there are aspects of the Jewish tradition that I actually do hold on to, it is an aspect of like I don't know, I'm like anti-hierarchical, but like I guess like the sense of like ideally we would have in some sense a degree of stability in our lives that speaks to a more like a stable holiness, and like even legal, even if that has to be like legalized in a certain way, like I think that that is part of the tradition of like diaspora Judaism, like an extensive legal tradition. And I think that like I want a revolutionary change that amounts into actual like stable practices that people can do in their daily lives and like have respect for. And I don't get and I think that that drives like the actions that I do or like want to participate in. um and I don't know, yeah, I haven't been able to do one or the other because it is impossible to respect and honor the world that my parents think through. It's simply not possible. It's anti-life. But it is it feels incredibly lonely, the vision of just like wandering with your ideals sort of alone and disconnected. And I think that's like that mythology of like I don't know, again, being on like a Jesus type on their own with their disciples, sort of like preaching and moving and like leaving behind families, just like I'm not comfortable with it. And what we've learned too from a lot of many like revolutionary movement is that people are fueled by feeling that like community around them will carry on even if they do not, and we don't, I think, often get to experience that in like a consistent way in the States yet, so building that up is huge as well.
Yeah, I hope it didn't seem like I was like, oh, I'm just gonna let my parents be complicit in genocide. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah.
But I do think that um, I don't like I'm okay with some disavowing for my values, just because I don't think I have that close of a relationship with my family that other people might,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. Like I can take
Yeah.
forego their ideals and be like, all right, I'm gonna just show you that this is the right way
Right.
because we have a lot of conflict.
Yeah. I think ultimately, when it comes to like, Palestine, I think that our own our own um, complicity is the most telling compared to our families, like our own complicity. The fact that none of us are going to do anything really, you know. Um, but how can we find hope beyond that horizon? I think I don't know. Okay, yes. Once again, I guess I'm relapsing into like the addiction to like end episodes on the most dour note I can possibly find. But I don't know.
No, but it's true, like
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, because like we can blame our
it's easy
family for
to,
things, but
yeah.
also we are complicit, right? And like
yeah,
our children, if we were to have them, would look at us with the same credulity as we look at our parents and say like, "What the fuck were you doing? You just sat there, right?"
Yeah.
yeah. But the thing I struggle with, and again, this goes back to that fear that I mentioned in all these other episodes. It's like I don't know what I as an individual can do other than like
Yeah,
burn myself
yeah.
out.
You're
Like
right, right.
one thing, what, like at the rally yesterday, for example, someone tried to self-immolate again, right? And it's like even that, like I was in a conversation with a friend and I was like, this, like, rallies themselves don't feel good to me because it feels like we aren't doing anything, and
Right.
we're just kind of standing there cheering and stuff and saying their same chants, and I'm hearing the same people speak, and I'm not like, I know that people gain power from this, and I know that I'm there because I think that there's something in the optics of it that I don't quite get yet. But then we have this moment of like someone tries to self-immolate, and like that, in my understanding, like, okay, yeah, if you feel like there's nothing else you can do besides take yourself out of the equation, that feels noble, but then you become just fodder for perspective. Like people just pick apart
Yeah.
whatever you've
Even
done
that is
and like
yeah.
perform, like it becomes in and of itself a performance, and that's not the fault of the individual, but more so the fault of the system, that doesn't mean much anymore, right? Like and so I sit here where it's like, okay, I could dedicate, like being someone who lives in DC, I could dedicate the rest of my life to, um, I will phrase this as particularly active action against individuals who are perpetrating this more directly than others. And if I do that and ultimately and most likely fail, then what becomes of that beyond more restrictions and more pain for other people, more, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's not what's the use, it's more so that like, it's more so, the fear that I have is that I lack the community that's like widespread and invested in a particular way of acting, and if I can't feel that strength, then I'm ultimately succumbing to what feels like a personal weakness, and I have to sort of keep that just floating in the back of my head and not as a driver of myself, because that leads into nihilistic, apathetic thinking, right? So I have to, like, try to generate different things, work on divestment things, try my best to organize mutual aid efforts, like try the channels that other people. Oh wow, syncretism is a great word for this episode. But like I try to work with other people on their levels of operating, because that's what's provided for me. And I can share these thoughts with you all. That's fine. But I've shared these thoughts with some other people, and it doesn't quite resonate, if
Right,
that makes
right,
sense.
right.
Like, it doesn't, people are kind of like, you're, what are you doing? You know what I mean? And so it's like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm pushing myself into further isolation because I'm also putting a target on my back and others.
Okay, yes. Okay, so that I think that illuminates a lot of what you have been kind of trying to trace out in some of these episodes of this podcast, where you're talking about this lingua franca, this like universal language, and like how do we translate this to as many people as possible. And I think that like actually the family is the best bet we have at translating it arbitrarily across people, because like like we don't choose our family, but by extension they don't choose us, so like they're stuck with us as much as we're stuck with them. So like um again, is this a reduction to the liberal idea of like changing your family's mind to some extent, but also it's not by being didactic. I think it's by by being honest, I think, maybe, or by being, you know, by responding to things truly.
Have you guys read Fathers and Sons by chance by Turgenev? I think. Very classic. Like, I mean, when was it written? Just like after serfs were abolished in Russia. Fathers and Sons was written in 1862, in like the period of the abolition of serfdom and sort of like burgeoning uh, yeah, just like massive generational change. I feel like that was that period in the 18 and 1900s in Russia. And the novel is like there's nihilistic in favor of, yeah, socialism, abolition of serfdom's son and his parents' generation. And this was like a very classic theme in this like brief period of like Russian literary genius, that for some reason now there's like the canon of Russian literature, and it was literally just like 100 good years. But whatever, culture's weird. But this is one of those novels within that, and like the son, who's like the nihilist scientist, new sort of revolutionary man, is ultimately like his downfall isn't necessarily his ideas, but that he's just like very cruel to his parents. Like they're like ask him to come over, and he's like, I will come over for a day, but now I am leaving on the horse with my friend. And his parents, like, I can feel how heartbroken his parents are as I read it so intensely when he leaves on the horse and his parents like set up the bed and they put the spoon and they just want things to be normal, and then he ultimately gets like pneumonia or some shit and dies, and like that's the one time they're able to like be together. And I feel it physically, and I do think like what you're saying about honesty is if you're not able or have decided that the best thing for you to do is to like completely disconnect from family, then it would be braver to maybe be honest with like your positions, or why you're acting the way you
Yeah,
are, or why the world changing as
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
And that
To try to, yes,
that's something.
yes.
Maybe there's something meaningful in
And
that.
again, looks like the challenge for me as well, right? Because this podcast has always been like a personal project as well. But like the project for me as well would probably be to, because like why am I moving back to Minnesota? Like why am I even here? I think that the project would be to like show up because like we haven't even talked about this, and I think that we're like over time right now. But like, but these like holidays and like the drag that I feel, the like the effort it takes for me to be like, fuck. I mean, I guess I will go. I guess I will go to this Halloween party that my sister's throwing. Like, or like, let alone fucking Thanksgiving or like this New Year's event that's hosted by my family. But like showing up to these things, but then like not coming to them and saying like, fuck this shit, like you guys are so problematic, but by just like holding your own when somebody asks you, oh, what do you think about this thing? Because that's gonna happen, and it's being able to like, I don't know, that might be some kind of glimmer of hope within the family when it comes to like, when it comes to dialing in people's real beliefs. Because I think a lot of the times people just are. Another topic I wanted to get into is the fact that like a lot of people who, I don't know. Another topic I wanted to get into is like the idea that like a lot of breeders, to quote Reddit, a lot of people who have babies are not necessarily the most bright people. And so like the odds are, if you're like questioning all this shit, then you might actually have like a altogether different perspective than your parents. And if that's the case, then like it has to do with a variety of code switches, maybe more so than even just like moral decisions, right? When it comes to like recoding your families.
Just like really quickly too, like you brought this up at the beginning of the episode, but like, or we were talking about how just like things become more hollow and shallow over time, and if we're upset with our familial rituals, like I was thinking too, like it's so much harder in the context of the past year to just like sometimes like go to a birthday. 'Cause I feel like we go to birthdays and it's like this is celebrating my friend being born. We're just like going to a bar and we're not even talking about my friend, and like what are we, I don't know, maybe I'm sounding emo or something, like immature. Like
What are
I
we
should be
doing
able to like
here?
go to a bar and celebrate a friend's birthday, but I'm like I feel like our ritual isn't matching up to like the celebration of life anymore, especially in the context of like so much death. I'm just like, if we're going to celebrate life, can we like actually celebrate it, and like what rituals do we actually need? But it's like we have to come up with like new or meaningful, or like remake meaningful our rituals, and like that's in family and friends in a lot of ways.
That's beautiful, yeah.
Yes, I'm. I'm not going to belabor it. Yeah, there's so many thoughts that I have, but yes, I think you're right. And working on that is chipping away the like veneer that people don of like apathy. It's not even apathy, just kind of like ignoring the elephant in the room, right? And the more you can kind of like give a little sugar with that hard pill, it's easier. Maybe I'll. That's a good way to
Right,
truncate all my
right,
thoughts
right,
there.
right. I think that this
Because
like
like
all to. Sorry, was there more?
You have
no,
to put in sugar for the pill from Slow Dive, like right at this moment. You know that,
Okay.
right?
damn. I don't know that song, but
Damn.
That should be the outro.
Okay, you got it. Whatever.
Continue.
Speaking of outros,
Damn.
there is so much more to get into, and like I think that this, if nothing else, necessitates that this is not the sole podcast episode that you will feature on, Celia. Um,
Let's do a live one in Baltimore at the Visionary Arts Museum when you visit
Interesting.
what, you're
Jackson in
coming to
December.
Baltimore?
I don't know
I
about
mean, I live in
Baltimore, but
New York City, and Jackson said he might go to DC, and I like the
I have like
Baltimore
winter break
Visionary Art
off,
Museum.
right? I have winter break off, but
Continue. Sorry.
the point is that we need to do an episode about the emissary, right? Like we have
Mm-hmm.
set the ground, just like all these other discussions. We have set the we set the table for them, but we have not yet really dug in to the main course. Yummy. So we need to do that. But in lieu of that, in the meantime, Celia is there anything that you would like to plug aside from the what was it, Slow Dive song? What was the song?
Sugar for the pill.
Sugar for the Pill. Is there anything else you would like to plug?
Sure. Check out the Drop ADL from Schools campaign, Anti-Defamation League. They're really bad and have way too much influence in schools. That's a good campaign. Check that out.
Let's go. Okay, we'll link that in the freaking description. Celia, thank you very much for joining us today. There was a lot.
Thanks. Do we
There's
add something to the manifesto? Doesn't that happen?
Oh yeah, that's what I was gonna do. That's the next part. So you're ready for that, huh? You're ready for that.
Yeah.
I'm
This
ready.
is good that you're ready for this.
What are you thinking?
How's that feel to rot with glee?
Yeah, that actually feels specifically like attuned to the conversation we're having about.
I know, it's like to say like to prescribe sugar with your pill, maybe it's too much of a cliche, but if you could do something with that.
Syncretism.
Unhonorable.
Honor the unhonorable. Unthronable?
You thrown it.
Honor the honor the unhonorable. I think me being tipsy is starting to come out a bit more as we're writing. You gotta put syncretism somewhere in there.
Okay. Sometimes it feels like something went wrong and that's what we're in.
Put some sugar in my bowl.
Gotta have my bowl. Gotta have cereal. Everybody's looking forward to
Here's the new one. Ready?
Alright. Sometimes it feels like something went wrong and that's why we're here, that we're in some kind of cosmic cage or simulated psyop. We become in the face of simulations and psyops and from wrongerness spring. Syncretism is for the honorable and dishonorable alike. In thought and in body, no one, not two, in sky and seed soon, we dream up shadows to love through and hold their callous hands, shaping change in the nether pool from breath to breath and coming up again and again, seeking vistas of freedom. Learn from the labyrinths and breathing mountains. How do you look and where are you going? Note when you're stuck, put sugar on your tradition pills, and record before breaking. How's that feel to rot with glee? Put sugar on your tradition pills and record before breaking.
Just the